The Chase Trifecta seems to be that one setup that a lot of folks live and die by in the credit card game, but why is that? As we know from the video I made a while back about the negatives of Chase's credit cards, they do have some downsides, but at the same time, they're some of the most powerful credit cards in the entire game. Since there is just so much to cover with this setup, I wanted to try to condense it down into just a few main parts for you in this video. First, of course, I'll give a breakdown of each of the 3 cards that make up the most popular Chase Trifecta at least. Then I'm going to talk about multiple alternate paths you can take to building out your own Chase Trifecta setup. After that, I'm going to tell y'all why this setup is so popular. And then lastly, I'll cover why this setup could be overrated depending on who's looking at adding it. With that being said, let's go ahead and kick it off with card number 1, which is going to be your catch-all credit card in this credit card setup, that of course being the Chase Freedom Unlimited. As the name suggests, this card is one of Chase's Freedom credit cards, which means it has no annual fee. The Freedom family of credit cards is composed of the Chase Freedom Unlimited, of course, the Chase Freedom Flex, the Chase Freedom Rise, and technically the OG Chase Freedom. The Chase Freedom Unlimited stands out from the rest of the Freedom family and lives up to its name because it gives you an unlimited 1.5% back on all of your non-category spend. But on top of that, it's going to give you 5x back on travel booked through Chase's Ultimate Rewards portal, 3x back on dining, and 3x back on drugstores. So for a no annual fee card, that's definitely not bad at all. Not to mention, you can usually find a pretty good welcome offer on this card depending on when you're applying for it. For example, at the time of me recording this, you can find a welcome offer for $200 back or 20,000 Chase Ultimate Rewards points back after spending $500 in the first 3 months of having the card. Plus, you'll get an additional 5% back on all of your gas purchases made in the first year of holding this card, up to $6,000 worth of spend. If you compare this welcome offer to cards very similar to the Chase Freedom Unlimited, you're not going to beat this offer. For example, the Wells Fargo Active Cash is a 2% credit card that does usually come with a welcome bonus, and right now it actually also will give you $200 after spending $500 in the first 3 months, but it's not going to give you that additional 5x back for up to $6,000 worth of spend on gas. Then if you compare both of those offers to the very popular 2% credit card, the Citi Double Cash, that card's generally never going to come with a welcome bonus, which is why it's not one of my favorites. As for additional benefits on this card, since it's a no annual fee card, it's not going to have anything crazy with it, but it does give you access to Chase's partner benefits with companies like DoorDash, Lyft, and Instacart, and it actually does have some decent retail and travel protections too, so if you're interested in all of that, I'd recommend reading up on that yourself. This is definitely my most recommended beginner credit card by far, mainly because you can use it in really any situation and know that you're getting at least a respectable flat earning rate, but also because the points that you're earning on this card are going to be Chase's Ultimate Rewards points, which are some of the most valuable points in the entire credit card game by far. So if you're somebody that's concerned about getting this card while there are a bunch of other 2% credit cards out there, just realize for one that this card offers much more than just that flat 1.5% back on everything else, but it's also earning some of the most valuable points you can find, which might make that 1.5x back worth way more than 2% back that you get on another card. But of course, we're going to cover how you can get a lot of value from your Chase points later on. Now with our cleanup card covered, let's move on to more of a, I guess, flex credit card for lack of a better word in this setup. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, Chase did kind of nail the name on their Freedom cards, but that's besides the point. But of course, card number 2 is going to be the Chase Freedom Flex. The Chase Freedom Flex is likely the most well-known credit card out of this entire credit card setup. And if it's not the most well-known, then it's probably the most utilized, even by people that are, credit card enthusiasts and have a ton of different credit cards. Being that this is another Freedom branded credit card by Chase, it's also going to have no annual fee, which is great. And the welcome offer on this card is actually exactly the same as the Chase Freedom Unlimited. So if you were to spend $500 in the first 3 months of you having this card, you get $200 back or 20,000 Chase Ultimate Rewards points. Plus you get an additional 5x back on gas for the first $6,000 worth of spend in the first 12 months of holding this card. And the best thing about the bonuses on both of these cards that we've talked about so far is that you can actually get both of these cards bonuses. Since Chase treats each Freedom card as a completely separate product, you can get both of the bonuses even within a year if you wanted to. But of course, if you're trying to maximize your welcome bonuses, you probably wouldn't want 2 cards giving you 5% back on gas in the same year. But if you're just somebody trying to build out your core credit card setup, just know that yes, you can get both of these cards back to back and get the welcome bonuses on both. The reason I called this card the flex card of this setup, besides the name of it, is because of the way it earns. Just like the Chase Freedom Unlimited, it's going to give you 5x back on travel booked through Chase's Ultimate Rewards portal, 3x back on dining, and 3x back on drugstores. And instead of that 1.5x back on all of your non-category spend, it's just going to give you 1x back. What makes it special though is that it gives you 5x back on rotating quarterly categories that Chase changes every quarter. Now those categories could vary from anything like grocery stores to Amazon.com or really anything in between. Let me actually pop up a quick screenshot here so y'all can can see what the categories have been for 2023. That way you kind of know what to expect going forward too. Just so you know too, you only get 5x back in those rotating categories on up to $1,500 worth of spend per quarter. So it's not unheard of that you'd max out each one of these quarters every single year, depending on your spending habits. And that's exactly why you see credit card pros like Ben Hedges, for example, having multiple Chase Freedom Flexes, because that increases that quarterly cap and allows them to get even more Chase Ultimate Rewards points back on those 5x rotating quarterly categories. But for most people like myself, one flex is probably going to be enough for now. Since this card again has no annual fee, it's not going to come with a ton of additional benefits, and actually it has the exact same partner benefits as a Chase Freedom Unlimited, and it has the same travel and retail protections. But the one additional thing you get with the Chase Freedom Flex compared to the Unlimited is cell phone protection, because the Chase Freedom Flex is a MasterCard. Now we've covered the two main workhorses of this setup, but at this point, our points aren't really worth anything more than 1 cent per point, making this basically just a cashback setup. So we're definitely in need of something to help this setup stand out from the rest. And that, of course, is where card number 3 is going to come into play, that being the Chase Sapphire Preferred. Don't worry, like I said earlier, in part number 2, we're going to be talking about some alternate paths you can take to building out your Chase Trifecta. But again, let me get through the mainstream Chase Trifecta first, and then we'll get into those fun strategies here in a second. The Chase Sapphire Preferred is really what brings this entire setup to life. But to get that privilege, we're going to have to actually fork up some cash and pay an annual fee for this card. Granted, this annual fee is only $95, which is a very small price to pay for the amount of value this card can give you. But before we get into this card's superpower, let me tell you more about the welcome bonus on this card and how it earns and all of that stuff. The welcome offer on the Chase Sapphire Preferred at the time of me filming this is for 60,000 points after spending $4,000 in the first 3 months of having it. However, usually at least once per year, we have an elevated sign-up bonus for 80,000 points after spending the same $4,000 in 3 months. So if you're not in a rush to get this set up, you could just wait until one of those offers comes around. And of course, those offers aren't guaranteed, but I just want to tell you what's out there. This card once again has overlapping categories with both the Chase Freedom Flex and the Chase Freedom Unlimited, that being 5x back on travel booked through Chase Ultimate Rewards portal and 3x back on dining. But this card also gives you some unique categories like 3x back on streaming services, 3x back on online grocery store purchases, annoying, I know, 2x back on travel, and 1x back on everything else, of course. So as you can see, this card does give us a couple of somewhat helpful categories, but nothing groundbreaking by any means. So how are we going to make up that annual fee? Well, for one, this card does come with a $50 annual hotel credit when you book a hotel through Chase's travel portal. And I actually just got this credit back on my Chase Sapphire Preferred as of last week. But I also realized that a lot of people can't be bothered to use that credit because they don't want to use the portal for their bookings. But just know that sometimes you can find some pretty great deals through the portal, which I will be covering in a future video. But you may be wondering why I'm saying that when you can only get 1 cent per point through the travel portal, right? Well, one of the powerful things about this card is that it actually gives your points a 25% boost whenever you use them through Chase's travel portal or through their pay yourself back feature. Now, a 25% boost on your points means that you'll be getting a 1.25 cent per point redemption every single time you use your points through the portal or through pay yourself back if the categories are right for you. Now, that's great, of course. We like boosts on our points, but that's still not necessarily going to make up the annual fee depending on, again, how you travel. But the true hidden power of this card is that it grants you access to Chase's travel partners. In part 3, I'm going to tell you some of the most valuable ways to use your Chase points, so hold your horses there, but just know that Chase's travel partners are some, if not the best, in the entire credit card game. As for other added perks and benefits, this card's going to give you more access to Chase's partners like Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart, for example. And they even added some Peloton benefits to this card if you're feeling really bougie, but I doubt I will ever use that personally. This card also has much better protections than the Freedom cards do because you are paying an annual fee and it's more broadcasted as a travel credit card. And one protection in particular that a lot of people really like is the primary auto collision damage waiver that comes with this card. If those smaller benefits are important to you, again, I'd recommend that you go and read up on those on their website before making a decision on this card. After covering each of those cards in pretty good detail, let's go ahead and move on to part number 2, where I'll tell you some alternate paths you can take to building out maybe an even more ideal Chase Trifecta than we just covered. Let's first start with how you could get started with this setup if you literally have no credit cards and no credit history and you just want to get kickstarted somehow. And personally, the way that I actually got started is very similar to that. I got started with the Chase Freedom Student when that card was still around. And while that card didn't give me anything crazy, I think it gave me like 1% back on all of my purchases and actually did come with, I think, a $50 welcome offer. That card has been replaced with the brand new Chase Freedom Rise. Luckily for you, this card actually earns better than the Chase Freedom Student and arguably is easier to get approved for because it's open to everybody, not just students. This card's going to give you 1.5x back on all of your purchases, and it also encourages smart financial habits by giving you a pseudo welcome offer of $25 after you enroll in automatic payments. Also, I want to note too that again, this is a starter credit card just to get you into Chase's ecosystem. But after you've been holding it for a year or so, you can actually product change this card to a different Chase card, likely one of the Freedom cards, so that you can get even more value from it rather than just having it, being a sock drawer card that you never use. In reality though, this card effectively replaces the Chase Freedom Unlimited if you only use it for the 1.5x back on all of your miscellaneous spend, which is why I think Chase really needs to bump up the earning rate on the Chase Freedom Unlimited to make it more competitive, but we can talk about that later. If I was to recommend a specific credit card to product change this one too, I would recommend that you product change it to the OG Chase Freedom card rather than something like the Chase Freedom Flex, because this is a card that you can't actually apply fresh for anymore, so there's no welcome bonus associated with it that you'd be giving up by product changing it to that card, but also because it still gives you 5x back on those rotating quarterly categories like the Chase Freedom Flex, so it really just does become a solid card you can use for those rotating categories. Of course, as long as you don't need all those additional benefits that come with the Freedom Flex, because they're not the same card exactly. Okay, now I just mentioned two different cards that you could sub in the beginning stages of your Chase Trifecta journey, but what about that third credit card? What about that one that, is supposed to give you all of the value really that this setup provides? Well, as most of y'all know, Chase does have two Sapphire branded credit cards, the Chase Sapphire Preferred, which we've been talking about here today, and its luxury bigger brother, the Chase Sapphire Reserve. The Chase Sapphire Reserve is a very viable option for those that are maybe a little bit later into the credit card game. And it's also one that you can actually product change your Chase Sapphire Preferred to down the line if you do find yourself needing the additional perks and benefits that come with the Reserve compared to the Preferred. Considering the Chase Sapphire Preferred usually has the higher elevated offers on it, generally the best approach is going to be applying for the Chase Sapphire Preferred first, holding that card for at least a year, then product changing it to the Chase Sapphire Reserve if you do see your travel habits justifying that card. There are two things to keep in mind here with the Sapphire cards. For one, you can only get one Sapphire card bonus every 48 months, hence why I said the Chase Sapphire Preferred is technically the most optimal approach, but you can also only ever be holding one Chase Sapphire card at a time. So if you're somebody that knows that you're going to want the Chase Sapphire Reserve as soon as possible, then it may be worth sacrificing a few thousand points on the welcome offer to just go jump straight in with the Chase Sapphire Reserve instead. Rather than me going fully in depth on this card in this video, I'm just going to direct y'all to another video I made recently at the time of me recording this about my dream credit card setup, including the Chase Sapphire Reserve, where I broke this card down in more detail. Just know that the Sapphire Reserve is going to give you a better boost on your points, airport lounge access, an annual travel credit, and much more. Before we move on to part 3, I of course need to mention what arguably could be the better Chase Trifecta, or some cards that could at least be sprinkled into the normal Chase Trifecta to give you a better return on your spend and better benefits depending on your goals in the credit card game. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the Chase Inc. business cards. Whether you want to just swap in the Chase Inc. Preferred as your third credit card in this setup that still gives you access to Chase's travel partners and that 25% boost on your points, you could go that route, or maybe you want to swap in one of the no annual fee Inc. business cards instead of one of the Freedom cards. All of that's going to be up to you, and I'm again not going to go in depth on these cards in this video because I've made dedicated videos on them in the past, but just know that a mixture of both a business and personal Chase Trifecta may actually be the most optimal path for you. And of course, I have to say this in every video I talk about business credit cards, but you are likely eligible for a business credit card even if you don't think you are. So again, maybe do some more research on that if you're curious. Now it's time to move on to the part of the video where I think everybody can get some value from, even if you already knew everything there is to know about the general Chase Trifecta we just covered. So let's go ahead and break down why this credit card setup is so popular. For starters, one of the main reasons this credit card setup is so popular is because all of the credit cards we've talked about so far earn Chase's Ultimate Rewards points. And Chase's Ultimate Rewards points are arguably the most valuable point currency in the entire credit card game. The main reason I say that is because their points are extremely flexible while also giving you a competitive redemption rate in basically every redemption category possible. And that's going to be different from other lenders like Amex, for example, who have some very lackluster ways to redeem your points. So what I mean by all of that is that Chase's points can be redeemed for 1 cent per point in cashback form, which is the cashback table minimum. But if you're somebody that has either one of the Sapphire cards or the Inc. Preferred, you can boost your points in the travel portal or through the pay yourself back feature to 1.25 or 1.5 cents per point. And if you're a more avid traveler and you know how to use your points in the best ways, you can take your Chase points and transfer them out to Chase's travel partners, where you can get usually at least 2 cents per point if you find the right booking. If you are looking for the most valuable redemptions for your Chase points through their travel partners, you're either going to probably want to be staying at Hyatt hotels and redeeming your points through Hyatt, or if you're looking for those really high cent per point values for flights, you're likely going to be wanting to travel internationally through a program like Air Canada or something like that. Honestly, the way that I find myself using my Chase points the most is either through Hyatt or Southwest. With Hyatt, I get usually at least 2 cents per point, and with Southwest, I get on average about 1.4 cents per point. Of course, I say all of this, but if you're somebody that just doesn't like staying at Hyatt's or you just hate Chase's transfer partners in general, it doesn't matter what value you could get from these points. You really just have to go with the lender with transfer partners that you really like. Going back to the flexibility of Chase's points though, if you are somebody that, is usually on team travel, looking for those aspirational trips, getting 5 to 10 cents per point, Chase's points are great for that. But if you're also going through a season of life where you just want some cash back in your pocket, you're not going to be traveling as much, you can actually use your Chase points for that as well. Now, you can't say that for a lender like Amex, for example, unless you jump through a bunch of hoops, and usually you have to pay about a $695 annual fee for a card that will allow you to redeem your points at least a 1 cent per point rate in cashback form. The only other lender with flexibility just like Chase's is going to be Citi, but the reason that I think Chase's points are better is because I like their transfer partners more. If you like Citi's transfer partners more, then you'd argue that they're the better lender. But all of this just goes to say that I really value point redemption flexibility, and Chase is going to be a lender that gives me that and gives me access to my favorite transfer partners, so in my opinion, they're the best. Speaking of redemption methods, I know a big reason that a lot of people like Chase too is because of their pay yourself back feature, at least when the redemption categories are good. I can pop up a table here showing you what the pay yourself back categories are right now at the time of me recording, and as you can see, most of them are going to be for charities. And while I'd like to call myself a charitable person, at the same time I do like to use my points for having better experiences with my loved ones, so that's not quite charity, but I think we can all relate there. And while the categories are pretty lackluster right now, there are times where the categories are really good, and if you can get that 1.25 cent per point redemption with your Sapphire Preferred or Ink Preferred, or a 1.5 cent per point redemption through your Sapphire Reserve, this pay yourself back feature can be really nice. It's basically cash back but on steroids. One specific use case of this comes from my buddy Stan the Credit Frog, who was in town a couple of weeks ago for our Creator Conversations episode, and he talked about how he used his Ink cards pay yourself back categories of internet, cable, and phone services to cover his cable bill for 2 years, where he effectively just never had to pay for it because he just kept auto redeeming his points through the pay yourself back feature. And I think that was at 1.1 cents per point, so a little bit better than the cashback table minimum. The next reason Chase's credit cards are so popular and powerful is because you can get multiple bonuses on each of their cards. This is again very different from a lender like Amex, who has a once in a lifetime welcome offer rule on all of their cards. Just so you know though, for Chase's Freedom cards, you can get a new welcome offer on those every 24 months. And for the Sapphire cards, you can get a new bonus on them every 48 months. This is honestly a big reason as to why Chase's credit cards are so sought after, especially considering that welcome bonuses are going to give you by far the most value in your entire credit card journey if you're somebody looking to maximize value and get a bunch of credit cards. Now, the next two reasons this setup is so popular kind of go hand in hand, so let's just combine them into one. And that's going to be that one, this is a very cheap setup, and two, this setup is very good for beginners to intermediates in the credit card game. As for it being cheap, I say that because you can get all three of these cards with just an annual fee of $95 total. The only other mainstream trifecta that is as cheap as this one is the Citi Trifecta, once again. But if you compare it to something like the Capital One Duo that has a $395 total annual fee, or the Amex Trifecta with a $945 total annual fee, obviously the setup looks a lot more appealing. Talking about the fact that this setup is good for beginners to intermediates is more of a neutral point, I guess, rather than something that's like really good about it. But the reason I say that is because Chase does have the infamous 524 rule that applies to all of their credit cards. So one of the big reasons this setup is so popular is because a lot of people have great experiences with it while they're getting started on their credit card journey. In reality, if you're somebody like myself that is trying to get a ton of different credit cards and maximize your total value in the credit card game, eventually you kind of graduate away from the Chase Trifecta, at least spending wise, and you transition into more of a hybrid lender approach. However, at the same time, I do find myself coming back to Chase's credit cards, especially when I'm either, spending towards a new welcome bonus after I've waited the clock out, or if I'm just lacking on Chase points and need to accumulate more of them, I'll switch back to the Chase Trifecta. But in the beginning of your credit card journey, keeping things to just one main lender with a flexible point currency that can adapt with you as your lifestyle changes is really amazing and will be a big reason as to why I continue to recommend the Chase Trifecta, especially to beginners. Okay, fine. Enough of the good. Let's talk about some of the bad. A lot of y'all have probably already seen the video I made talking about the problem with Chase's credit cards, and that video is going to go way more in depth than I will here, but I figured I'd kind of summarize the main points for you to let you decide whether or not you want to go watch that full video. So let's just go ahead and break down the full list. Problem number one is that Chase's credit cards do lack coverage on some of the highest spend categories that a lot of us have. Problem number two is that they do have a lot of overlapping categories among all of their cards, as we talked about earlier. Problem number three is a big your mileage may vary topic, but it's that they have poor customer service sometimes. Problem number four is that lately they've seemed to have some pretty subpar rotating quarterly categories on their cards like the Chase Freedom Flex or the OG Chase Freedom. Problem number five is that in general, they do a hard pull for basically everything, which does kind of suck. Problem number six is that they have no pre-approval tool, which their competitors like Amex and Capital One, for example, do have and beat them out on. Problem number seven is a little bit of just a gripe, and that's the fact that they have poorly manufactured cards, like they have the raised numbering on the front still and all of that stuff, which is just really annoying. And problem number eight is the Chase 524 rule, which is a massive rule that applies to all of Chase's credit cards. And I've also made a full video on that because it's just so important. If anything, I just want to reiterate, like I talked about a little bit at the beginning of this video, instead of just taking what I say as gospel, please try to just form your own opinions on each credit card that you apply for, because even though somebody on YouTube like myself really likes a certain card, it may not fit your strategy at all, and you just need to understand that for yourself. If I wanted to make this video 30 to 45 minutes long, I could break down each of these problems one by one, but instead I'm just going to direct you to that video next so that you can get the full picture for yourself. With all that being said, as always, Odin and I just want to say thank y'all so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and we'll catch you guys next time.